Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at something really tough. It's a plane crash that happened near Washington, D.C., and the story's gotten pretty complicated because of all the politics involved. We've got two news articles from Forbes to help us make sense of it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to be digging into the details of the crash itself, but also all the reactions and the political back and forth that's come after.
Yeah, it's really something, isn't it? How a horrible event like this can so quickly turn into something that everyone's got an opinion on and everyone's trying to use for their own purposes. I mean, what are your first impressions as we kind of start going through these articles?
You know what really gets me is the contrast. On the one hand, you have this just awful scene, a commercial plane and a military helicopter colliding. It happened right near Reagan National Airport, January 29th, just before 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah.
And nobody survived. It's just devastating. 64 people on the plane. It was a Bombardier CRJ-700. And then 3 more people on board the Black Hawk helicopter, all gone.
It really does make you think about how fragile life is, doesn't it? And how quickly things can change. I mean, it's understandable why people are so shocked by something like this and why they're looking for explanations even before we have all the facts.
And that seems to be where the political stuff really takes over. I mean, sure, we see the official statement, President Trump, Vice President Vance, other officials offering their condolences. But then Trump goes on Truth Social and almost right away starts questioning what the helicopter was even doing there.
Yeah.
Starts pointing fingers at air traffic control.
Yeah, and he doesn't stop there. He has this whole press briefing, and he basically puts the blame for the crash on what he calls the FAA's, quote-unquote, disastrous DEI hiring practices. He says that air traffic controllers who were hired under the Obama and Biden administrations might have, severe intellectual disabilities. He even goes on to say that his new hiring policies, which totally ban DEI, are going to make sure that only, quote-unquote, naturally talented geniuses get these really important jobs.
It's a pretty strong statement to make. And to be honest, it feels kind of early to be pointing fingers at any one group or policy, especially when the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they're just getting started with their investigation. One thing that I thought was interesting, though, is that both of our articles mentioned that the FAA, they actually exceeded their hiring goal back in 2024.
Yeah, that's a big detail. It kind of suggests that there were already efforts underway to deal with the controller shortage, which has been a problem for years now.
Yeah.
So it makes the story that Trump is pushing a little more complicated.
For sure. It adds something else to think about. And then, just when things couldn't get any more heated, former Transportation Secretary Buttigieg comes out and calls Trump's remarks reckless and despicable. He even points out that Trump himself was the one who fired the head of the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, and disbanded the Aviation Security Advisory Committee back when he took office in 2021.
So it's back and forth accusations, right? Each side trying to use this tragedy to score political points.
And meanwhile, the NTSB is stuck trying to figure out what actually happened. And reading about the recovery operation, it just sounds incredibly difficult. The wreckage is in the Potomac River, and they're dealing with really rough conditions, windy, choppy water. It's going to be a huge challenge just to find and recover all the evidence.
Oh, absolutely. The NTSB sent in what they call a GO team. Basically, they're a rapid response team for major transportation accidents. And these guys are looking at everything, the black boxes, the flight recorders from the plane, if they can even find them. Debris from both aircraft radar data pilot records, weather conditions at the time. It's this massive undertaking.
And the articles say this investigation could take anywhere from 12 to 18 months to complete. It's going to be a long time before we have any real answers. One of the big questions that they're focusing on is whether the pilots had something called visual separation. Basically, could they see each other in time to avoid a collision?
Right. And this is where that air traffic control audio from liveatc.net that we have really makes you think. You can hear the controller asking the helicopter pilot if they have the passenger jet in sight. And then the controller gives the helicopter a command. And then just seconds later, silence. Just this horrible silence. And then you hear the gasps from the people in the tower. It's chilling to listen to when you know what's about to happen.
Yeah, it really sends shivers down your spine.
Yeah.
Makes you realize just how much depends on those split-second decisions and communications when you're up in the air.
Yeah.
I also read that Reagan National Airport actually has a bit of a history of near collisions. Apparently, it's a really tough airport for pilots because the airspace is so complex and crowded with all the traffic coming in and out of D.C.
Yeah, you have to wonder if there's some bigger issues with the way the airspace is managed or with the air traffic control procedures themselves, things that maybe need a closer look.
So we've got this terrible crash, a ton of evidence to go through, and this political storm brewing all around it. But I keep thinking about the people who are on those flights.
Me too. It's
Yeah.
easy to get caught up in the technical stuff and the political arguments, but at the end of the day, this is about 67 lives that were lost.
The Forbes articles mentioned that there were some members of the U.S. figure skating community on board the plane. They were on their way back from a national development camp. And what's even more tragic is that there was also a former world champion pairs figure skating duo from Russia on that flight.
It's a powerful reminder that behind all the headlines and the investigations, there are real people with families and dreams and stories that were cut short.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still so much more to unpack. When we come back, we're going to take a deeper dive into the potential consequences of this crash and the complexities of the NTSB investigation, and what it could all mean for the future of aviation.
You know, reading these articles really makes you realize the pressure those air traffic controllers are under every single day.
Yeah, definitely. They've got to manage all those planes, keep them moving, and most importantly, keep them safe. And it's all happening in this incredibly complex airspace. It's hard to even imagine how much focus it takes.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? I think this crash really shows how important the human factor is in aviation. Even with all the fancy technology we have, it still comes down to the pilot's decisions, their reactions, their communication with the tower.
It's like this balancing act between
Yeah.
humans and technology. Right?
Yes.
Both are crucial, but there's always a chance something could go wrong on either side.
Exactly. And that's why the NTSB investigation is going to be so thorough. They'll look at everything: the pilot's training, how much experience they had, maintenance records for both aircraft, communication logs, visibility conditions that night. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle where every little piece matters.
But one of those really important pieces, like we talked about earlier, is this idea of visual separation, right?
Right. So just to explain it for our listeners, visual separation means the pilots are basically using their own eyes to keep a safe distance from other planes. It's pretty common, especially in busy airspace, because relying only on instruments isn't always enough.
So even if the plane and helicopter were technically following their flight paths, if they couldn't see each other or misjudged the distance, that could have caused the collision.
Exactly, and that's why the air traffic control audio is so eerie. You hear the controller ask the helicopter pilot, "Do you have the traffic in sight?" And the pilot says, "We do." But seconds later, the crash.
It makes you question everything. Did they really see the plane?
Yeah.
Was there some kind of miscommunication? Or was it just a terrible error in judgment?
Those are exactly the questions the NTSB is trying to answer. But these investigations are really complicated, so it could be a long time before we have a definitive answer. There might not be a simple explanation.
And then you add in all the political pressure and attention this crash is getting, and it makes things even more difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Trump's claims about the FAA's DEI hiring practices, even though there's no real evidence to support them, they've already stirred up a lot of anger and speculation.
Yeah, and it's created this climate where it's hard to know what to believe. Everyone's looking for someone to blame, and that makes it even harder for the NTSB to do their job impartially.
It's a delicate situation for sure, but it's so important that we let the investigators do their work without interference and let the evidence lead us to the truth, no matter how difficult that truth might be to accept.
I agree completely. And while we're waiting for the investigation to play out, it's important to remember that this is ultimately about the 67 people who died.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of the human cost of this tragedy.
It's easy to get caught up in the technical details and the political back and forth, but every one of those statistics represents a life, a story, a family that's been shattered.
The articles mention that several members of the U.S. figure skating team were on that plane, coming home from a training camp. Imagine all those hopes and dreams, all that potential that was lost.
Just heartbreaking. And then there was that former world champion pairs figure skating duo from Russia. These were incredibly talented athletes who had achieved so much and touched so many lives.
It's a powerful reminder that even amidst all the chaos and confusion that follows something like this, there are deeply personal stories of loss and resilience that deserve our attention and empathy.
So we've talked about how complex the investigation is, the challenges of managing airspace, the political storm swirling around this crash. But as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I think it's time to zoom out a bit. What can we learn from this? What needs to change to prevent this from happening again? This whole conversation, it's really unsettling. It kind of makes you realize that even with all the amazing technology we have in aviation, there's still this underlying danger, this sense that things could go wrong at any moment.
Yeah, I get that feeling too. We just sort of assume that flying is safe, and most of the time it is. But events like this are a harsh reminder that there are always risks, especially in a system as complicated as air travel. It makes you think, are we pushing the limits too far? I mean, the number of flights keeps going up every year, both commercial and private. As the airspace gets more crowded, does that increase the likelihood of something like this happening again?
It's a question that aviation experts have been debating for years, and there's no easy answer. Technology has come a long way. We have sophisticated radar systems, collision avoidance, constantly updated air traffic control procedures. But at the end of the day, you can't eliminate the human factor. There's always the potential for a mistake, a misjudgment, or just an unexpected situation that no one could have predicted.
And like we saw in this crash, it seems like human factors did play a role, whether it was miscommunication, a lapse in judgment, or just the limitations of human perception under pressure. Those are things that technology alone can't always solve.
Exactly. And it highlights the need for constant training, really strict safety protocols, and a culture of vigilance in the aviation industry. We can't get complacent. We have to keep learning from these incidents, identifying those weak points, and always pushing for better safety measures.
It also brings up the question of how much public perception and political debate influence how we understand these events.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw how quickly this crash became politicized with all those accusations being thrown around.
It's a very human reaction to want to find someone to blame, especially when something so tragic and seemingly senseless happens. But we can't let that rush to judgment or political agendas cloud our understanding of what really happened.
Right. The NTSB investigation is still underway, and it's vital that they're allowed to do their job thoroughly and without any outside pressure.
And even when the investigation wraps up and we have a clearer picture of what caused the crash, there are still going to be discussions about how to prevent something like this from happening again. Those debates are important, they're necessary, but they need to be based on facts, sound reasoning, and putting safety first above everything else.
You know, this deep dive has been a tough one, but it's also been a powerful reminder of how complex aviation is, how technology and human actions are constantly interacting, and how crucial it is to always be vigilant about safety. But amidst all the tragedy, we've also seen the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of those who've lost loved ones, and the dedication of all those who are working so hard to investigate this crash and prevent future ones.
Well said. And it's important for our listeners to take that message to heart. As devastating as this crash was, it can also be a catalyst for learning, for making improvements, for renewing our commitment to making air travel as safe as it can possibly be.
And with that, we want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. It was a challenging topic, but an important one. As we learn more about the crash and its implications, we encourage you to stay informed, to think critically, and to engage in thoughtful discussions about how we can all work together towards a safer future for everyone who flies.
Thank you for listening.